In this video, I'm going to talk about how to solve quadratic equations. And this is going to be a review, so you've likely seen this before. So remember, a quadratic function is a function that has the form f of x equals ax squared plus bx plus c, where the a, b, and c are real numbers, and a is not 0. So let's look at an example where we solve some quadratic equations. So let's solve the following quadratic equations by part A, factoring, and part B, quadratic formula, if possible. So if it's not possible to factor, for example, we'll say so, and then we'll try to use the quadratic formula. Okay, so in this first example, we have the equation 6x squared minus 7x minus 3 equals 0. So let's solve this by factoring, and I'm going to do this in two ways. So method 1, I am going to do this by guess and check. Guess and check. Okay, so I know that when I factor this, I'm going to have two parentheses, and it's going to be equal to 0. And whatever goes in these first spots in each parentheses, they need to multiply to the 6x squared. So this is where we have to do some guess and check. So I'm going to try 3x in one and 2x in the other. We might also try 6x in one and x in the other, and this is where a little bit of experience helps, and just doing a bunch of practice helps with knowing like what's the best thing to do. But if we tried the wrong one, that's okay, then we would just change our guess later and try that. Okay, so now we got to think about, well, what goes in those other parentheses? Okay, so let's try to fill in what goes in those other, let's put the 3x and 2x. Sorry, I didn't mean to see what goes in the other parentheses. I just mean to say what goes in these other slots. So what goes in these other two slots have to be numbers that multiply to the -3. And it can't just be anything. They have to be such that when I FOIL everything out, I'll end up with the -7x in the middle. And this is where the guess and check sort of comes into play a little bit. But what numbers multiply to -3? It's really just 1 and -3, or -3 and 1. At least those are the integers that multiply to -3. Okay, so I'm going to try putting a 1 here and a 3 here. And in terms of the signs, if I want to get a -7, I am going to pick, let me fill in the signs in the next line. So I have 3x, 2x, and then I have a 1 here and a 3 here. I'll put a minus with the -3, with the 3, and a plus with the 1. And this equals 0. And if I were to FOIL this out, it comes out to what I want it to be, 6x squared minus 7x minus 3 on the left-hand side. And once it's factored and it's equal to 0, I can go ahead and set each of these parentheses equal to 0. So either this one equals 0 or this one equals 0. So when the first parentheses equals 0, I will get x equals -1/3. And when I set the second, what's inside the second parentheses equal to 0, we'll get x is 3/2. And those are our answers. Okay, so again, there might be some, I might have to play around with my guesses a little bit before I get the right one, but nonetheless, here we are. We end up with this. Okay, so let's do this one other way. This one, so method 2 is what I'm going to call splitting the middle. Okay. And the key difference between these two is, with guess and check, if you practice this a lot, it's quicker. So if you practice guess and check a lot and you get good at knowing what to guess, this typically ends up being quicker. Splitting the middle is more systematic for smaller numbers. So when the A, the B, and the C overall collectively are smaller numbers. Method 2, splitting the middle, is going to be more systematic. So let's look at how splitting the middle works. Okay, so what I begin by doing is I draw an x. And then what I want to do is, at the top of the x, I'm going to write b. I'm going to write the middle coefficient, which is -7. And at the bottom of the x, I'm going to write what a and c multiply to. So 6 times -3, that's -18. And then I need to fill in these two blank spots with numbers. And the numbers that fill in those two blank spots have to sum to b, have to sum in this case to -7, and they have to multiply to what a and c multiply to. They have to multiply to -18. So we might have to think about this a little bit, but the numbers that end up working are -9 and +2. They sum to -7 and they multiply to -18. All right, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the -9 and the 2 to do what I call splitting the middle, to split this -7x term. All right, so let me write that down, and then let's talk about what that looks like. So now we use these numbers to split the middle. Okay, so writing down our quadratic, we got 6x squared. And now the -7x is the same thing as -9x plus 2x. And notice I've taken these numbers that I filled out in these boxes, the -9 and the 2. All right, and the last term is still -3. All right, so we have that equals 0. Okay, so we split the middle. Now what I do is, on the left-hand side of my equation, we have 4 terms. And a really common strategy for factoring 4 terms is to factor by grouping. And when we split the middle, grouping the first 2 terms together, so grouping the first 2 together and the last 2 together will always work when I split the middle. Okay, so from the first 2 terms, we could factor out a 3x, and I'll be left with 2x minus 3. From the last 2 terms, I can't factor out anything, so I just leave it as is, 2x minus 3, and that whole thing equals 0. And then we look at the 2 groups and ask ourselves, do they have anything in common? So they both have a 2x minus 3, so they both have this 2x minus 3. We factor that out because that's common. So we will factor out this 2x minus 3 because it's common. Then I have to write what's left over. So what's left over from the first term, so what's left over from here is 3x. That's what's left over. And then what's left over from the second term, the second group I should say. So from the first group we had 3x left over. From the second group, let me just put that brace again. Second group, what's left over is a plus 1. That's what would be left over if we took out 2x minus 3. All right, and this whole thing equals 0. And now, just like before, I have it factored. And it factors in the same form as what I had when I just did it by guess and check. So I can go ahead and write down what x is at this point. And we'll get x equals, from the first parentheses, 3/2, and then from the next one, we get -1/3. So we end up with the same answer overall. So notice that splitting the middle was a bit longer than guess and check, but it is perhaps a bit more systematic because we don't have to do as much guesswork in terms of thinking what goes in each of the slots. Okay, so let's look at another example. So part B now, I have a different quadratic equation. I've just changed, scratch that. This isn't a different quadratic equation, it's the same one. But part B, I think we just want to solve this now using the quadratic formula. So let's also show how we can solve this with the quadratic formula. Okay, so let's first remind ourselves what the quadratic formula says. It says that x equals -b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. And now let's plug into this. So -b will give me +7 plus or minus square root of, so b squared is going to be -7 squared. And then we'll have -4. A is 6. and then c is negative 3, all over 2 times a. So all over 2 times, and then a is 6. In fact, let me write that a better in this general formula. So a. All right, and now let's simplify this. So we have 7 plus or minus the square root of, so negative 7 squared, that's 49. And then negative 4 times 6 times negative 3 is going to be positive 72, all over 12. Whoops, this should be an equal sign. All right, so let's go ahead and continue to simplify this. All right, so continuing to simplify, we have 7 plus or minus, and then inside of the square root, when we add, what was it? I think it was 49 plus 72, we end up with 121. So that's nice because it has a nice square root. Over 12 equals, so we got 7 plus or minus root 121, that is 11, and then over 12. So we have two possibilities. We either get 7 plus 11 over 12, or we get 7 minus 11 over 12. And if we simplify the first one, 7 plus 11 over 12, this is 18 over 12, which simplifies to 3 halves. And that's one of the answers we got using factoring, so that's good. And 7 minus 11, that's negative 4 over 12, which is negative 1/3. And that's the other answer that we got using factoring. So we get x equals 3 halves, or negative 1/3, and that's our answer. Okay, so let's look at another example. So example 2, we have, I'm just changing what a is slightly. A is a negative number here, negative 2. We got negative 2x squared minus 7x plus 3 equals 0. Okay, so part A, let's try this by factoring. So this question, I want to give you a couple minutes to try this. So pause the video for about 2 to 3 minutes and try this both by factoring and by using the quadratic formula. So 4, 3, 2, 1, pause the video. Pause the video for about 2 to 3 minutes and try this on your own. All right, so hopefully you've done that. Hopefully you've paused the video for 2 to 3 minutes and really tried this on your own. That may not have been enough time to finish the question, but hopefully you were able to start to think about how you would begin. Okay, so part A, we want to do this by factoring. It turns out that this does not factor. This doesn't factor. At least it doesn't factor if we try to use integers to factor it. So this doesn't factor, so I'm going to put a sad face. So we're sad about that, the fact that it doesn't factor. Because when it factors, it's nice to do it that way. It's quick to factor. But if it doesn't factor, we can use the quadratic formula. Use the quadratic formula. All right. So A, it's not possible to factor, so let's do it with quadratic formula. That's part B. So we'll get x equals negative b is going to be positive 7 plus or minus square root of b squared, so negative 7 squared, minus 4 times a, which is negative 2, times c, which is 3, all over 2a, so all over 2 times negative 2. And now simplifying this, we have x equals 7 plus or minus square root of, so negative 7 squared, that's 49. And negative 4 times negative 2, that's 8, times 3 will give us 24. So we'll have plus 24 over negative 4. And if I simplify this a little bit further, we get x equals 7 plus or minus square root of 49. Oh, whoops, sorry. Let's simplify 49 plus 24. That is going to be 73 over 4. And at this point, this is as far as I can go. There's no perfect square that divides 73 that I'll be able to pull outside of the square root. So this is as far as I can take this. And these are my answers. So just to recap a little bit about these two methods, about factoring and the quadratic formula. So we did this by factoring in the quadratic formula. what I would say about these is factoring is quicker when it works. So typically when I'm faced with a quadratic equation, I'll usually try to factor it first, because if I can, it'll end up being quicker to do it that way. The quadratic formula, on the other hand, always works, but sometimes slower. And the other sort of drawback to this, the thing that might be a drawback to the quadratic formula, is sometimes we end up with big numbers inside of that square root, and it might be hard to evaluate those without a calculator. Okay, so at this point, we have reviewed how to solve quadratic equations. In the next video, we'll review that when we look at our graphs, which is a parabola, how to find the vertex, which is going to be where the max or the min of that parabola occurs.